Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Trebas Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi and we begin tonight with the return of Santa Ana winds and yet another red flag warning. A brush fire broke out in Poway, prompting an evacuation warning. It was reported this afternoon near Pomerado Road and Ted Williams Parkway. The fire burned 3 acres. But as KPBS reporter Alexander Wynn.
As you can see behind me, there's dozens of fire engines from multiple agencies attacking this fire right here. It started at around 1:15 with CAL FIRE supporting Poway fire crews, 2 helicopters and 2 air tankers and an attack airplane. Luckily, it started right behind a fire department, and the fire chief here says it's lucky because of the Santa Ana conditions we've had today.
That is definitely something to consider, that it was lucky enough that our first in engine was able to establish incident command and get an aggressive attack on the fire right initially on the first starts.
Now, this fire did prompt several evacuations, and the chief told me that residents would be able to move back into their homes at around 6 o'clock tonight. It will take several hours for them to make sure that everything is done and residents could actually safely move back in. Crews will be out here overnight to do any mop-ups and any to prevent any flare-up. As you can see, it's very windy right now. We have our 5th bout of Santa Ana winds, and that is creating a high fire danger situation. In Poway, Alexander Wynn, KPBS News.
And as we mentioned, a red flag warning is in effect through tomorrow night. KPBS's Scott Rod reports CAL FIRE has been staffing up in preparation for the worst.
Dangerous Santa Ana winds will blow through San Diego's inland valleys and mountain areas, with gusts between 60 and 70 miles per hour in some areas. San Diego has seen little rain in recent months, leaving vegetation bone dry and brittle. And the winds could be the strongest the county has seen in recent weeks.
The conditions are present for extreme fire behavior.
Captain Robert Johnson is with CAL FIRE San Diego County Fire. He says the agency has more than 100 personnel currently assisting with the devastating fires in Los Angeles County. The department is backfilling those positions by having local crews work overtime.
We staffed additional equipment, including additional fire engines, additional hand crew personnel. We've stashed additional water tenders, as well as patrol units.
San Diego Gas and Electric has started shutting off power to some homes in high-risk areas. The utility says more than 80,000 customers could be impacted in the coming days. Scott Rod, KPBS News.
And Los Angeles County is also under a red flag warning. The 3rd this month, something fire officials say is unprecedented for the region. Firefighters took advantage of calmer winds over the weekend, and containment of the destructive Eaton fire grew to 87% today, while the Palisades fire is now 59% contained. Also, as of today, all residents who evacuated from Altadena neighborhoods are allowed to return.
Well, looking ahead to tonight, we'll drop down to lows to the lower 40s here along the coast, or at least around San Diego. Clear skies, though we do have that high fire weather risk, especially for areas further inland, as we are tracking very dry conditions and very blustery conditions. We'll break it all down for you coming up.
And our other top story tonight, Donald Trump is now officially the 47th president of the United States. Brian Abel is in Washington, D.C., where the inauguration day was different than those in recent decades.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
With those words, President Donald Trump returns to the nation's highest office. Only the 2nd president in American history to serve twice, non-consecutively.
I, James David Vance, do solemnly swear.
His running mate, J.D. Vance, now the 50th Vice President of the United States. The iconic ceremony held inside the Capitol Rotunda due to dangerously cold conditions.
The golden age of America begins right now.
President Trump's first official speech, familiar, and now empowered.
As our victory showed, the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda.
An agenda that will roll out quickly in the hours ahead.
Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
Among the festivities into the evening, an inauguration parade, a celebration inside Capital One Arena with supporters, and 3 official inaugural balls this evening.
It is my hope that our recent presidential election will be remembered as the greatest and most consequential election in the history of our country.
In Washington, Brian Abel, KPBS News.
The way the federal government treats immigrants is changing with President Trump's new term in office. The administration has promised to overhaul immigration with sweeping executive orders starting today with a disablement of the CBP One app. And I am joined today by KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis to talk more about what we may see. Welcome, Gustavo.
Hi, Maya. It's been a very busy day.
It has, I'm sure. Now, you've been following the controversial asylum app since its inception. So what do you see happening here?
Well, it already happened, right? This is, I would say, the biggest news to come out of today. And it wasn't even something that Trump mentioned in the inaugural address. But without warning, without really any announcements, it ended. People who had been waiting for months to get an appointment to seek asylum in the U.S. found out this morning that, nope, you don't get that shot anymore.
Now, some of Trump's new policies are going to affect Tijuana just as much as they are affecting San Diego. So what can you tell us about how prepared Tijuana is for Trump 2.0?
Yeah, well, actually, I spent last Friday in Tijuana talking to folks just about that. So we have this story over here that lets you hear directly from the people who will be most impacted by it.
Buen provecho.
Father Pat Murphy loves Casa del Migrante. He especially enjoys giving visitors a tour of the migrant shelter in Tijuana's Buena Vista neighborhood.
This is the patio where people hang out.
Father Pat, as he is affectionately known, has lived here since 2013. Back then, it was mostly a place for deportees adjusting to life back in Mexico.
Everybody comes here, we do an interview, we say, look, if you're going to stay here, we can give you up to 45 days, but you have to be willing to go out to work, and we'll help you find a job. And some people accept that right away.
But in recent years, Casa del Migrante has become a place for families trying to seek asylum. Father Pat says the shelter is louder, more energetic, and full of life.
When we start taking care of families, we have to find a place for the kids to have activities and be able to play.
Apart from the hustle and bustle that comes with children, things are calm. For now, there's plenty of room for families, and Father Pat has even noticed fewer deportees seeking help. But this period of relative calm may not last after today. President Donald Trump is beginning a second term, and he's promised an unprecedented crackdown on immigration, including mass deportations.
In a cruel sense, it means 4 years of torture. I just came from the doctor, and the valet in the parking lot said to me, "You're going to be very busy."
Father Pat worries that Tijuana is not prepared for mass deportations. Migrant shelters are underfunded, and city officials have not offered any direct aid.
And so I expect if they don't help us, it's going to be people on the streets. And the weather is getting cold. Someday it's going to rain. It's going to be really bad.
In recent weeks, officials in Tijuana and Baja California announced ambitious plans to open a shelter for 10,000 people. Tijuana Mayor Ismael Burgueño says it will be a dignified space where deportees can get access to social services and job training programs.
Queremos dar el mejor resultado posible y tratar como se merecen a quienes estén en la situación de ser deportados.
But as of Friday, the mayor still has not disclosed where the proposed shelter would be or when it would open. A spokesperson for the mayor says the update was postponed to later this week. And this lack of detail or even a basic timeline does not inspire confidence.
The government has not met with the shelters. They keep saying they have a place for 5,000, 3,000, 2,000. In the end, they have nothing. they have us.
Father Pat and other experts say deportees need more than just promises of shelter beds. They're a vulnerable population in need of specialized services. Annie Lopez is a trained psychologist who specializes in helping deportees and migrants. Her office in Tijuana is decorated with colorful drawings of kids writing, "I love you," and "Merry Christmas." She says the transition is hardest on deportees who have spent decades in the U.S.
A lo que yo he visto en la consulta es este cambio de tanto tiempo allá y qué va a pasar aquí.
Helping them readjust to life in Mexico is hard work. First comes the most pressing needs: clothes, food, shelter, and a job. And then comes the hard part: addressing the mental toll of deportation. Many are separated from families, and they just lost everything from their life back in the U.S.
Van a estar solos, vulnerables, su familia lejos, si tienen consumo o adicciones. O sea, son muchos factores que en el caso de los hombres los ponen mucho riesgo.
Lopez is especially worried for deported men who do not have healthy coping mechanisms. Without a support system, she says they're at high risk for drug and alcohol abuse. Father Pat says the people of Tijuana will have to step up, as they have in the past.
Tijuana is very hospitable in that sense. There are a few people here and there who have a little xenophobia in their blood, but they should remember where they came from. Because most of Tijuana is not from Tijuana. Some people came from other parts of Mexico, and the migrants who are here have really built the city.
And that's something we plan to keep an eye out on. It's just how Tijuana handles mass deportations or anything that comes with it. And actually, starting tomorrow morning, I'm going to be in Tijuana talking to migrants who are impacted by the loss of CBP-1.
Well, we really appreciate you following this story and others. Thanks so much, Gustavo.
Thank you, Maya.
Today, Americans across the nation are honoring the life and legacy of civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Alliance San Diego hosted its 37th annual All People celebration at the Balboa Park Activity Center. The event featured live music, performances, and several live speakers. And this year's theme is Protect Dignity.
Today, Alliance San Diego is hosting the All People celebration, a day to honor the living legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a glorious day, and it's a day for us to recommit ourselves to the work that he called us to do, which is to treat everyone with dignity and respect, build a beloved community where all of us belong, citizen and immigrant alike, straight, queer, black, brown, white, all of us. Build the spaces where all of us feel safe and all of us can thrive.
2 awards were presented at the event. The Leo Carrillo Change Agent Award, awarded to Armin Harvey for his work supporting communities impacted by floods last January. And the Ashley Walker Social Justice Award, awarded to Pedro Rios of the American Friends Service Committee. And as the nation pays tribute to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, one location in our city has a lasting memorial to the day that he came to speak. Ken Kramer shows us in this story about San Diego.
It's one of the historic moments in our city that too few people know about, I think. What happened here one day?
It was May the 29th, 1964, when one man came and gave a speech in this gymnasium. And to find out about it, you just look right up there.
Look, would you notice it? At Golden Gym at Point Loma Nazarene University, it's a podium, but it's not until you get a little closer that you realize that it really is more than that. There's a video screen built into it and pictures of a day nobody who was here will ever forget.
I wish you could see yourselves and look how beautiful you look. And somehow this is what mankind should be and how mankind should look.
The sound comes from a tiny handheld speaker, but the words seem bigger than life. A San Diego address by Dr. Martin Luther King. On that day, in this place, the only sound was his voice as he talked about how happy he was.
To have the opportunity of coming once more to the city of San Diego, California.
So much has happened since then, so many events just in this gym. But I don't think there's anything that has the same historical significance as the time Dr. King spoke here, of the struggle for integration in the South, of the support he was getting from people in San Diego and elsewhere, of the mountain that had yet to be climbed. And by the way, right where that podium is today is exactly the spot on which he stood. A man with a dream and maybe some fond memories about San Diego.
Ken Kramer has a half hour of stories every week about San Diego. You can see them Thursday nights at 8 o'clock here on KPBS. Researchers at UC San Diego may have cracked the code to reaching people most impacted by tobacco use and helping them quit. KPBS reporter Katie Hyson looked into their surprising results.
Dialing 211 connects callers to local resources. It mostly serves people in economic hardship. That population also smokes at higher rates. So UCSD researchers thought, why not offer their tobacco quit line service at the end of California's 211 calls? They gave a $20 gift card for completing one quit line counseling session. Xu Hongzhi led the effort. He worried people calling 211 are in crisis mode over things like rent and electricity and might not take the referral.
Quitting smoking may not be high on the agenda.
But about 80,000 have so far. His team compared it to people referred to the quit line by a doctor's office. They figured
they tend to have health issues, so they would be more primed to say, yeah, I will quit smoking.
But it turns out the 211 group
with a little incentive, a little nudge, they were twice as likely to sign up for the service.
And the 211 group was just as likely to come back for a second session, even though the incentive was over. They quit smoking at a similar rate.
So that kind of shows they weren't just there for the money. There's some intrinsic motivation. All they need is just kind of a little nudge to start the process.
Zhe hopes other states will follow California's lead. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
And those in LA's fire zone certainly have had to worry about their physical health, including poor air quality. But that's not the only health concern. Brian Abel explains the immediate and potentially long-term effects of disasters like wildfires on mental health.
With the danger and destruction wildfires can bring, it's easy to understand the stress people experiencing them are under.
A disaster like this can have huge mental health impacts. There can be signs of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder.
Up to 40% of impacted communities can show signs of these clinical symptoms, says Dr. Mishra, including anger, shock, sadness. There's the uncertainty of losing a home, a neighborhood, a neighbor. The stress can bring cognitive impacts too, making it hard to focus when everything around you feels threatening.
People will feel very distracted, unable to pay attention to their daily life activities, and they will also have poor ability to make decisions.
Both victims of a disaster and first responders are vulnerable.
Firefighters are all under the threat of PTSD as well in a situation such as this. They have received some amount of resiliency training, but they're not immune to these mental health impacts.
The mental health impacts can linger years after the smoke clears if they aren't addressed, says Mishra. Talking with a trained professional can be key. Other coping mechanisms like listening to music to de-stress and deep breathing exercises can help, along with volunteering and talking with others going through the same thing.
This is collective trauma, which requires a collective healing and us supporting each other.
Well, let's start you off with your weather headlines, what we need to know as we head throughout the rest of this week. Unfortunately, we have another fire weather threat here on the way, or really ongoing, as we are tracking critically low relative humidity levels. We really could use another boost in moisture, as we did see over the past weekend. Though we are still tracking those strong Santa Anas, and that's going to last at least through Tuesday, though we aren't quite done with the northeasterly flow just yet throughout the rest of the week. We'll hint on that in just a bit, but there is that fire weather risk and that blowing dust risk as well. So now see conditions on tap. You can see the weather icons here. Even tonight, we do have windy conditions on tap. Oceanside, you're going to bottom out at 30. Now, Ramona, you're at 42. Borrego Springs, 30 as well. San Diego, 42. Now, we do have those Santa Ana winds still on tap here at least through Tuesday. And I want to step off the screen really quickly because this does include the northern and, of course, eastern suburbs of LA, but even down through Riverside County and San Bernardino County. And that does include the valleys and the areas east of San Diego, where we could see that elevated fire weather risk and gusts as high as 60 to 80 miles per hour. Your AccuWeather local storm max as high as 100 miles per hour. There is that dangerous fire risk extreme. That is the highest level that you can go on our scale, this is going to be erratic, very similar to what we have seen, especially when the Palisades fire broke out, the Eaton fire broke out, as we are going to have very, very gusty conditions, and it's going to be very hard to control any flames that do break out, and those containment efforts may be delayed too, especially because we have seen a boost in those containment numbers for some of the ongoing fires. Unfortunately, rolling blackouts still possible as well. Now tomorrow we'll top off at 69 there in San Diego, Escondido at 72, and Oceanside 71. So we do have the milder temperatures to go along with that fire weather risk. While it's not extremely hot, those winds barreling out of the mountains can create very steamy and hot conditions themselves, and that's what helps fuel those fires. Coast here for the next 5 days, we're staying in the 70s, at least low 70s Wednesday, back up to 78 there by Thursday. We have a little bit of a temperature roller coaster, though. We do dive in quite a bit by the weekend. You'll see a similar trend here further inland. While it is going to be windy, highs are going to continue to rise, back up to 81 there by Thursday, down to the 50s by the start of the weekend. Big changes even for the mountains where we are tracking showers. That is the good news, right? We are finally going to see a shift in the weather pattern. This is going to be our chance to see some moisture to help benefit the very dry terrain across Southern California. Now along the deserts, temperature-wise, we're going to stay in the 70s for the most part after Wednesday, but then we do dip. By Saturday, it's going to be a little cooler. For KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Bree Guy.
The political climate is shifting now that President Trump is back in the White House. KPBS video journalist Matthew Bowler explores how San Diego comedians are preparing to respond to Trump's second term.
Politics can be great fodder for comedians.
Like, they put elections right before Thanksgiving on purpose.
Stand-up comedian Walter Ford is on stage at National Lampoon The Yellow Door in downtown San Diego. He's been making people laugh for nearly 10 years now, but in 2020 and 2021, he was in the street using his comedy to protest.
I was at all of them. I was at all of them, bro. I've seen everything. I was heckling Proud Boys. You right on that. I was heckling Proud Boys.
Police in riot gear, protesters fighting with each other,
Look at John DeVito, Danny DeVito.
and Ford cracking wise as a way of standing up for his principles.
Comedy, I feel like, is one of the few justices left on earth. And through comedy, even if it's something that's extremely serious, like talking to some Proud Boys, if I add some comedy into it, you're gonna pay attention to this really serious situation, and you're gonna laugh at it.
That was during President Donald Trump's first term. Ford says his second term may be very different.
Conservative dream for America, is that what it, you know? If we allow that, then I do think that there's a lot of danger to my profession and people that do anything close to my profession as far as creativity.
We know very little about what Trump's second term will be like, given that he has no fixed principles or core beliefs or coherent ideas or constructive solutions or plans or proposals or policies or values or thoughts of any kind. He watches TV and then he screen posts about what he just saw on TV. He's basically an intellectual Roomba. He goes in one direction until he bumps into something, and then he just goes off into another direction.
That was Seth Meyers on his NBC show, Late Night. Following that bit, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "These are not shows of entertainment, they are simply political hits. And Comcast should pay a big price for this."
He's kind of made these promises kind of worrisome from somebody who's already out there. And, like, you know, as a comic, like, I think of us as the jester. My job is to poke fun at the king, right?
Victor Paz Jr. is a comedian and produces comedy shows around San Diego for his company, Cackles.
I'm curious to see, actually, how the comedy world's going to be, how to evolve in the next, we'll know, I think, in the next 8 months or so.
Paz says he isn't censoring the comics in his shows, but he says comedy is risky, and sometimes the joke lands and sometimes it doesn't.
I've seen people get super offended when you've gone after Trump and they've been Trump supporters and they've been super sensitive about it. And then I've seen the other side where, like, they're a Trump supporter and they're like, keep going, that was a good one.
Paz describes what he thinks the best comedy is like.
It's whittling dynamite. Like, you don't know how long the wick is.
Political science professor Rick Epps says comedy can be a great way to say some very profound things.
When you look at the spectrum of how artists are able to articulate through humor, for example, in this case, people can digest things a little more intently when they hear it in a humorous way.
But speaking truth to power comes with its own set of risks, according to Epps.
And in our country, the danger is, but they may not kill you right here like they would in other countries.
Make some noise. You're an American. You got freedom.
However, they can certainly cut you off financially, and I call it, it's like we in political terms we call it coercive diplomacy.
Ford agrees.
I do think that there is a certain amount of caution that needs to be taken as far as making sure you don't mess up the church's money.
However, through his jokes, Ford aims to build bridges both inside the comedy clubs and at the protests.
At the end of the day, we're all humans. Black, white, red, purple, conservative, liberal, libertarian. And I feel like at some point in time, comedy can be the middle ground for us to at least be able to have a conversation. Give yourselves a hand clap for coming out. We got some more comedians.
Matthew Bowler, KPBS News.
You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.